Final Fantasy Type 0 is a really interesting direction for the series. It takes a much darker look at war than most Final Fantasy games, and while it was originally released on the PSP exclusively to Japan, I first played it when it was remastered for consoles.
Such folly.
The strange thing is, despite finishing it back then, generations later I could barely remember anything about it, so this ended up being one of the more interesting games to revisit.
You serious, yo?
Straight away, there's a few things to like here. Some of the takes on classic Final Fantasy summons are fantastic. I love that the game has an actual overworld to explore. And some of its story threads feel genuinely unique within the series.
I see you're all here. Let's begin.
Very quickly, here's the setup. The world was divided between 4 nations that existed in a fragile stalemate. That changes when the Empire of Militesi wipes the Laotians off the face of the map using an ultima bomb, basically this world's equivalent of a nuclear weapon. With one nation gone, the Empire turns its attention to Rubrum, home of our protagonists.
We have arrived.
We play as Class 0, a group of 14 cadets, each with their own weapon, fighting style and combat role. Between major story missions, you're given a limited amount of free time that can be spent socializing, training, exploring the overworld, or tackling side content.
That's enough talk about Class 0.
The Militesi Empire are the bad guys. They're this huge industrial military power that's built entirely around conquest, strict hierarchy, and overwhelming force. Everything from their architecture to their uniforms gives off a very deliberate authoritarian vibe. Honestly, the comparison kind of makes itself. They're basically Nazis.
Nonsense.
But what I think is Type 0's most interesting idea is how it handles death. Get this, whenever someone dies, friend or foe, these massive crystals erase all memory of their existence. Friends forget them, family forget them. It's like this world itself is designed for endless war. People never have to carry the trauma of losing someone because the moment that person dies, poof, they're simply erased from memory.
I think we were talking about something, but we killed him, so I don't remember anymore.
In a way, it almost sounds merciful, a world where grief simply doesn't exist. But if you ask me, it's this grief, these memories that make us human and how we grow. We learn from conflict, tragedies, or remember others and process the loss. And the crystals strip all of that away.
There's death all around us, but it doesn't sink in.
Class 0 are these kids who will show no mercy, execute the enemy one moment, including screaming unarmed scientists, and then immediately forget they existed. And on the other side of that coin, they also can't remember their friends, family, or even teachers who died.
He was our commanding officer, but I can't even remember his face.
And I've got to say, this idea or mechanic really stuck with me this time through, more than most of the game's actual plot. It's not just a cool piece of world building, it's a world where death has been stripped of meaning entirely, and that gives war a really cruel, unsettling edge.
Indeed.
So the game begins with this unknown character slowly dying out, before our cadets find him and he kicks the bucket. The first time I watched this opening, it felt random, I was confused, I had no stakes or connection with this random character. It was like the game was throwing you into something without context. But once I understood the rules of this world, specifically that everyone's memories of those that die are erased, looking back, this opening really resonated with me because that confusion, that lack of context, that sense of missing information, that's exactly what the cadets experience in that moment. His death happens and then he's just gone from their minds, no explanation, no emotional weight. If you think about it, the opening isn't random at all, it's deliberately placing you in the same blind spot as the cadets are in themselves. I think that's intentional design and that's really cool.
Satisfied?
Before I really get into the gameplay and characters of Type 0, quick pause. If you love RPGs, consider subscribing to Bytes or giving the video a like. I'm a bit of an indie game developer who covers RPGs, and I'm replaying the whole Final Fantasy series while ranking them. Thank you.
Well, that's over with.
Okay, so you're playing as Class 0, a group of 14 cadets. Most are codenamed after playing cards, and it's up for debate who's considered the main character, but this is very much a team effort. And like most ensemble casts, they're a bit of a mixed bag.
Wait, that's not a compliment?
I'd say some characters are far more memorable than others, but everyone's going to have their own personal favourites. The nice thing is that the game actually leans into that, it's your decision who comes along on missions. As you work through the story and side content, you can generally build a team around the characters you enjoy using the most. You can even bring reserve members who'll jump into battle if someone gets knocked out, which is a surprisingly neat little mechanic. It helps sell the idea that you're commanding an entire class of cadets across missions, rather than just a traditional RPG party.
You ought to do whatever it takes to see that success is the only outcome.
There's a lot of characters to talk about, but I'll stick to my personal favourites. Some I liked for their personalities, others for how they played, and a few for both. Here's my top 5. Sync looks and acts like this sweet innocent little girl, then pulls out a giant two-headed mace and starts causing earthquakes. Her attacks are so heavy she almost seems to struggle under their weight, making her slow to play but a skull-crushing powerhouse. Scythe is a badass scythe wielder. Two-handed scythes are criminally underused in Final Fantasy, and they're one of my favourite weapon types. She absorbs the malice of fallen enemies to empower herself and fuel her dark powers. She's a little twisted and rough around the edges, and she's probably the closest thing Type 0 has to a Final Fantasy Dark Knight.
Now!
King became my go-to ranged fighter with his dual handguns. He's older than most of Class 0, cool-headed, and rarely wastes words. While everyone else is caught up in the drama, King often ends up being the one providing a bit of overlooked common sense.
It's over.
Rem dual wields daggers, but I mostly used her as a support character. She was constantly throwing out heals, keeping the party alive, and her man alchemy skill was incredibly useful for restoring the team's MP. Personality-wise, she's one of the more compassionate members of Class 0, often acting as a pillar of support for those around her.
You can't die!
And then there's Ace, my main guy for most of the game. Instead of swords, daggers, or guns, he fights using a deck of magical cards that he flings at enemies from a range.
Let's do this!
A lot of his abilities revolve around shuffling and manipulating those cards with different effects, which gives him a really unique feel. He's also one of the youngest members of Class 0, yet often ends up being the voice of reason.
Dismissed.
Overall, gameplay feels pretty hack and slashy. It's an action RPG, and there's definitely some jank here. It didn't help that I was having a few speed and frame rate issues with the PC version, which made some of that roughness even more noticeable. I generally preferred ranged characters because they let me sidestep a lot of the combat's jank. The melee fighters can be fun, but gameplay feels a little clanky, camera can be awkward, just not as responsive as you'd hope.
What?
Like I said, it's fairly janky, and part of me wonders if that's simply the cost of what Type 0 is trying to do. There are 14 playable characters here, all with their own weapons, abilities, and playstyles. That's a huge amount of systems and animations to juggle, all spread across a game that originally started life on the PSP.
Ridiculous.
That said, combat is perfectly serviceable. You can dodge incoming attacks, and enemies occasionally become vulnerable to counterattacks. You'll often see these yellow and red circles appear that let you land devastating bonus damage if your timing is right. It's a simple mechanic, but it adds a nice layer of reactivity, and it's especially satisfying trying to bait out a more resistant foe like a giant flan, and getting those punishing critical hits in. One thing I did run into a few times were fights that felt heavily geared towards ranged characters. Some bosses were awkward or outright difficult to hit with melee characters. Ranged characters felt almost essential in those encounters. That said, I really like a lot of the Empire's more mechanical enemy and boss designs. Their Magitech-powered mechs really stood out, sick as hell, even if sometimes they leaned into those ranged heavy fights. General gameplay is structured around missions that are locations broken up into smaller sections. It feels a bit segmented, which I'd chalk up to the game's PSP Origins. In the original version, Type 0 also supported multiplayer. You could jump into other players' missions and bring one of your cadets along. That feature didn't make it into the remaster, and instead it's replaced with AI-controlled support characters, often named after the game's developers. It's a bit naff compared to what the original offered.
What a load of crap, yo!
It is a Final Fantasy, so you can summon Eidolons. Some of the summon designs in Type 0 are just badass. Diablos and Odin looks sick as hell. Bahamut and Ifrit are really cool. I wasn't quite as big on Golem and Shiva. There's quite a unique take on Shiva here. She skates around on ice skates, which took a bit of getting used to. Some of these summons are locked behind New Game Plus. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of gating content like that behind a second playthrough, but I did go the extra mile here to unlock them for the video. And the way summons actually work is interesting. You can call them in battle, but doing so requires sacrificing one of your cadets, knocking them out. That restriction makes summoning a deliberate tactical choice, and it feels thematic to Type 0's themes of war and sacrifice. You gotta check this out. There are these larger scale moments in the story where these Verboten Eidolons are summoned, a step up from a regular summoning. One of my favourite bits is when our nation Rubrum calls Alexander against the Empire of Militesi. It's pretty awesome just watching this colossal being absolutely annihilate the Empire's army with its divine energy. It just steals the show. But what makes it stick with me isn't just the scale, it's the cost. These Verboten summons require countless lives to be sacrificed. It's more like a dark ritual. And these people willingly throw their lives away to get an advantage in the war. It's one of the clearest examples of how brutal and twisted Type 0's world really is.
So this is divine will.
But here's the thing, once the battle is over, these massive craters scar the landscape, entire areas are just wiped off the map, and the overworld itself is stained by the marks of these conflicts. While everyone will forget who died thanks to the crystals, there's at least a grim reminder of the war, these scars left on the planet.
My brain hurts.
Which brings me to Overworlds. The Final Fantasy series had long moved away from these huge explorable world maps, so it's really nice to see Overworlds make a return here. Like I said, it dynamically updates through the war, and as you fight through the story, you eventually unlock access to occupied cities and towns. So during your free time, you're free to explore, pick up side quests, and venture out to optional locations scattered across the map. Some quests will send you to hidden caves and dungeons, giving you a reason to poke around beyond the main story. One criticism I have, the overworld is divided into separate regions with loading screens between them. That's almost certainly a limitation of the PSP hardware, but it does make the world feel a little less seamless than it could have been. Towards the end of the game, you can even unlock your own personal airship through an optional endgame dungeon, which is such a cool reward and it feels like a classic Final Fantasy milestone. There's also these sorties that appear between some major story chapters. They're essentially large-scale battles where you're invading and capturing territory on the overworld, in something resembling a real-time strategy minigame.
Okay, move out!
I love the idea behind them and it helps sell the scale of the war, but in practice they're extremely janky and never quite come together. Thankfully they're entirely optional.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
But yeah, a little story thread I really like involves Machina, one of our 14 cadets. It turns out the kid who slowly dies in the opening hours of the game was Machina's brother, and he only died because Ace pulled him into a major mission he just wasn't ready for. Which ties right back into one of Type 0's core ideas, the crystals wiping memories of the dead. People don't just lose lives here, they lose the fact those lives even existed. And then things get messy because some of the corrupt higher-ups in Rubrum decide to tell Machina what really happened.
They killed my brother?
Or at least their version of it, and that's what pushes him over the edge, and that's what fuels his betrayal. He turns his back on Class 0 and ends up siding with the Militesi Empire. I guess these higher-ups must have had some kind of record of his brother's missions and see that he didn't return, because if the world forgets the dead, then even they should have lost that information too.
That's about enough.
Another personal highlight is Gilgamesh, who shows up as a boss, which is always a treat. I like to think it's part of the running gag across Final Fantasy. He gets cast into the void in Final Fantasy V, and he just kind of keeps showing up in other games while he's wandering the void. It'll never get old.
Next!
And one of my favourite side characters on the Empire side is Qator. He's a general and sick as hell Magitech pilot.
Do you not know what they call me? I am Qator the Unscathed.
But he doesn't look very unscathed with his eye patch. I guess it's more that he's built a reputation in the Empire that he's undefeatable. What makes him interesting though is that he's not just some warmonger. He actually makes a major plan to stop extremists on his own side, detonating a nuclear-level Ultima bomb inside their own city to take out their enemies.
I'll take them all with me.
Qator sacrifices himself to protect innocent citizens, so even though he's technically an enemy faction commander, you kind of had to respect him.
Yes, sir.
Then you get the big turning point in the story. The three nations are brought into a truce to negotiate, and that's where things shift. We're told Class 0 assassinated the Queen of Concordia. Immediately the truce collapses and both Concordia and the Empire turn on Rubrum. Suddenly we're public enemy number one. Now, this is important. We never see the assassination, and because the crystal system erases memories of those that die, it's difficult to verify what actually happened.
And why do they think we did it?
The game leans into that uncertainty. We only ever see the accusations and the fallout. And in Type Zero's world, that matters, because if memory itself can't be trusted, it becomes a lot easier to twist the truth and spread lies. That's exactly where propaganda thrives.
Is that correct?
We crush these other two nations, and in typical Final Fantasy fashion, things go completely off the rails by the end. The crystal system starts breaking down, the world slips into full-on apocalypse mode. Meanwhile, the Empire's leader Cid slips away and ascends into something godlike, setting up the end of the world.
I shall hand down your punishment.
Opening up this endgame dungeon to stop him, and to be fair, it's a decent endgame finale. A series of trials, escalating encounters, that final push towards what might be the most unhinged version of Cid in the entire series, and that's saying something. The only way to actually stop him is for Class Zero to absorb his energy, his miasma, and take it into themselves, which leaves them in a fatal state. Now, you never actually see Class Zero die, but it's heavily implied they kick the bucket. Honestly, it just adds another layer of confusion to the story.
Wait, what the hell?
When you step back and look at Final Fantasy Type Zero as a whole, I think it's a game with some really strong ideas, wrapped in a structure that doesn't always serve them well. On paper, it's a brilliant concept, a war story where history is even more unreliable, where memories of the dead literally vanish, and that's what makes propaganda incredibly powerful. Just like in real wars, people are manipulated with lies and propaganda. It's a genuinely smart setup for a Final Fantasy game. It feels thematically like a war story. At its best, Type Zero has these huge set pieces, summons tearing through battlefields, shifting alliances between nations, and the constant weight of sacrifice, moments that actually hit. But my problem is more about consistency. The storytelling is sometimes a little fragmented, and key emotional beats don't land with the weight they should. You're left piecing together major events from implications, bonus cutscenes on multiple playthroughs, or from reports, rather than experiencing them directly.
But if that were true, we should still remember that we assassinated someone.
And that includes the ending, the final sacrifice, Class Zero's fate. It's all powerful in concept, but left so ambiguous that you're left asking, did they actually die or not? But here's the thing, maybe that's intentional, maybe it's thematic with the retelling of war stories, not all the pieces are there, or the truth is distorted. Maybe it's trying to mirror the state of the world itself, where history doesn't hold its shape, and even memory can't be trusted. Looking back, Final Fantasy VII had an unreliable narrator. Here we're effectively dealing with an unreliable world built on unreliable narration. Personally, I would have liked a little bit more clarity, at least by the end of the game. Sometimes it's less thought-provoking and more just disjointed and confusing. Still, there are moments where it does work, like the realization that the unknown soldier from the opening hours of the game was actually Machina's brother. That was a moment of revelation for me. And even if how the story is told doesn't quite work out the whole way through, I think the ideas behind it are strong, some of the most unique and interesting Final Fantasies ever attempted. So overall, I was leaning to a C rank. I think it's good, but when I factor in this was originally a Japanese PSP game, maybe I can squeeze this into B rank. Factoring in it's a handheld game, I think I can excuse a fair bit of the jank. I think I enjoyed playing this more than a lot of my C rank games. Thing is, basically there was a plan for this Fabula Nova Crystalis series, which share mythology and similar universes. It started with Final Fantasy XIII, Type Zero is part of that series, and Final Fantasy XV was planned to be, but that element was cancelled. And I've got to be honest, I think I enjoyed Type Zero more than both 13 and 15. Final Fantasy Type Zero gets a B rank. The gameplay is a bit janky, but the idea of managing a full class of cadets is genuinely unique. The summon designs are great, the scale is ambitious, especially for the PSP, and I really appreciated the inclusion of an Overworld again. But it's a game I respect more than I love, because its best ideas are often buried under its executions.
Dismissed.
Next up, plan is to revisit Dragon Age 2. I'm trying to do a retrospective of the entire series, and I think I might have found a new appreciation for number 2. In the meanwhile, check out my favourite moment in every Final Fantasy across the series, and you know you want to see my top 10 frogs in Final Fantasy. Have a good one.